Before we start today's episode, I would like to quickly read you our podcast disclaimer. The content in this podcast is for general reference and educational purposes only. It is not meant to be complete or exhaustive or to be applicable to any specific individual's medical condition. No information provided in this podcast constitutes medical advice and is not an attempt to practice medicine or to provide specific medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. This podcast does not create a physician-patient relationship and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please do not rely on this podcast for emergency medical treatment. Remember that everyone is different, so make sure you consult your own healthcare professional before seeking any new treatment and before you alter, suspend, or initiate a new change in your routine. Welcome to The Starting Gate. We're your hosts, Dr. Kitty Dotson
and Dr. Sarah Sheets,
two internal medicine doctors who spent years practicing traditional primary care. Over time, we realized something was missing from modern healthcare. A real understanding of how everyday lifestyle choices impact overall health.
We'll help you cut through the noise of the countless health influencers and their conflicting opinions, because no matter who you follow, the basics of lifestyle medicine are at the heart of it all.
Welcome to The Starting Gate. We're your hosts, Dr. Kitty Dotson
and Dr. Sarah Sheets.
We're excited today to dive into the topic of osteoporosis. And this is a great segue. We've had a month of looking at women's health issues, and this is a big issue for women. But it is also an issue for men, so we don't want to ignore the fact that this can definitely be a big issue for men as well. We're going to talk more about this today, and then after this, we're going to start transitioning into musculoskeletal topics. So we're going to have some great guests talking about knee pain, osteoarthritis, back pain, and really get into some of these musculoskeletal issues. But today, we are going to talk about osteoporosis, and although this is more of an issue for older adults, we want you to keep listening even if you're young, because the very best thing you can do is to try to prevent getting osteoporosis in the first place. So hopefully we can give you some ideas of how you can start on a journey to prevent that from being a problem for you down the road.
And we would love to introduce our guest today. We have Dr. Nick Trubee. Nick Trubee earned his doctorate degree in exercise physiology at the University of Kentucky and is a certified strength and conditioning specialist for now over a decade.
I know, it's crazy.
He was also a former university professor at the University of Kentucky and now runs an online business and has a passion for osteoporosis.
Yes.
So, Nick, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, no, first, thank you guys for having me on. This is very fun. Yeah, it's funny because you spend so much time in other areas learning a lot of other things, and then you find yourself 10 years later doing something completely opposite. Really, in my past is I trained a lot of firefighters, police officers, and SWAT team. That's where most of my research was when I was in academia. But at the same time, I had a pretty large clientele outside of the academic realm in strength coaching and personal training for people that were 60 or over. So I didn't really, at the time, realize how likely that most of those people were low bone mass. And you're always more conservative with your approach in building up their strength over time a little more slowly than normal, which is, I think, a great way to look at it. And I'll talk more about that. But I think all of it comes together to where it leads to where I am now, where probably 90% of who I work with are those with osteoporosis, or osteopenia, or trying to reverse one of those two things.
Would you mind just telling us what is osteoporosis
For
and
sure.
osteopenia?
Yeah, so anybody can Google it, and it'll likely say a loss or a low bone mineral density. If you look at the more medical diagnosis, it's 2.5 standard deviations from the mean, comparing yourself to a 30-year-old Caucasian woman. So likely, and it's just comparing yourself essentially to a younger version of yourself. In the kind of the gray area there, and this is where it gets fun when you dive into the details, is most people don't know what their actual peak bone mineral density was. They may have never reached what we think peak is. And I think a lot of the issues now, too, is late screening, which is 55 if you're a female and 65 if you're a male. And I think we're likely missing that by 25 and 35 years.
Yeah, we'll come back to those screening guidelines in a few minutes because I want to talk about that a little bit more. But just for anyone out there listening, thinking about who does osteopenia and osteoporosis affect, the majority of people are women, and your risk is going to increase the older you get. And there are a lot of other things, though, that can cause low bone density. And so it's things that can be really overlooked. If you have any of these things, you need to make sure that you are talking to your doctor about screening earlier rather than later. So having low testosterone, having hyperthyroidism, celiac disease, or other diseases that are going to affect your absorption in your gut of your nutrients. Any issues with calcium that could make your calcium higher or lower. And then a big one that really affects a lot more of our nation than we realize is malnutrition. And that doesn't necessarily just mean being underweight, because definitely being underweight and malnourished could increase that risk. But you could be overweight, but eating all the wrong things and still be malnourished.
And outside of those risk factors specifically, one of the reasons we do focus on women at older ages is because in that postmenopausal period of life is when we tend to see the biggest drops in our bone mineral density. We touched on this a little bit with Dr. Deidre Bashir when we were talking about menopause a couple weeks ago. But we really want to get across that it's not just that group of people that need to be concerned about their bone health, because when we actually talk about the numbers, they're astounding. The National Osteoporosis Foundation estimates that 10.2 million Americans have osteoporosis and that an additional 43.4 million have low bone mass. That is a lot of people that this topic is very relevant for. And we probably have even higher numbers than these because this is something that doesn't get screened a lot. There is a guideline that recommends it. Sometimes it's just overlooked in patients' care.
Yeah, and it's a big cost burden for our healthcare system, too. There's over 2 million osteoporosis-related fractures every year in the U.S., and it's thought that in this year that Medicare will spend close to $25 billion on costs for these osteoporosis-related fractures. So that is huge.
We know that most of these hip fractures are some of the biggest expense and burden, and that is something that osteoporosis puts you at risk for, because anytime you have osteoporosis and you have a fall, you're going to be at high risk of developing one of those fractures. And so that is why this topic is so important.
I think one of the big misconceptions, and Nick, I bet you hear this a lot, and I heard this a lot from my patients, was, oh, I think my bones are fine. I'd bring up, maybe we need to start doing some screening for your bone density. And they would say, oh, my bones are fine. I don't have any pain, and I have never broken anything. And so I think one thing definitely to know is osteoporosis does not cause pain.
Sure. Yeah. I think they're almost thinking it should. And I think if you get to that point, most people have been living with a compression fracture somewhere. Most of the time it's in their spine. But if it gets to that point, then I think obviously we've waited too long.
And so when it does come to screening, the test that we do most frequently for this is called a DEXA scan. Can you describe for people what it's like to have a DEXA scan?
Absolutely. Yeah. You basically are lying on a table in a little arm, goes very slowly from your head to your toes and then back. So you just lie there comfortably for 2 minutes. And it essentially is taking a scan of the different compartments of your body. So the scan can be more geared towards bone mineral density. It can also look at fat mass and fat-free mass, aka bone and skeletal muscle mass and all the other organs and tissues.
Is it painful, Nick?
It's not painful, but you're exposed to a little bit of radiation, not much. I think the most that you'll see is what I've been told is a flight from LA to New York. You'll experience the same amount of radiation. So obviously not super high risk by any means.
And so it is not as time intensive either as some other testing that occurs.
Right.
So it is an easy screening test to have done is the message we want to get across there.
Yeah. And if you're close to a local university, you might want to look at what studies, investigations they're doing, because many times you can get a free one done if they're using that as part of one of the studies. So I always tell people to look into that for sure.
Great point from someone who came in from academics
Yeah.
there.
I think that's great advice, too, because I know one thing I think all three of us are probably going to convey today is that we probably need to be screening sooner. But the United States Preventive Services Task Force recommendation is not to start screening until you have a postmenopausal woman at age 65. Honestly, when I was ordering these tests at 65 for most of my women patients, I was shocked if someone had a normal value. I remember if a normal result came in, I'd be like, oh gosh, your bones are good. This is awesome. But the vast majority of my patients, when I started screening at 65 per the guidelines, were already osteopenic, if not osteoporotic.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem there, too, is that's when insurance starts to pay for it.
Sure. Yeah, which is funny. It's ironic because I think these standards are in place to quote unquote save money on the medical side of things. But when you look at just the bone fracture alone, we're not saving any money. The cost and the expense of that to the taxpayer. So
Yes. It's a little backwards. Our message is always prevention here. So it
Exactly.
would make sense to do the tests to find out sooner. So you're doing all these preventative measures that we're going to talk about today. So you're not already having severe osteoporosis by the time you have a scan at 65.
Yeah.
But if you do have any of those things that we mentioned earlier, if you have ever had issues with your nutrition, if you've ever had issues when your body mass index has been low and you've been underweight, any issues with calcium or thyroid, you might be able to then get it covered by insurance sooner. So that would be something to definitely bring up with your doctor. And another thing just to bring up is there is no standard recommendation for men
No.
for us to screen. How often do you see a man with osteoporosis?
I'd probably say less than 10% of the people I see, but I think it's just literally awareness. They're not even, it's not on anybody's mind as far as should they be worried about it. And the ones that do, it's from an aspect of another test they've gotten, and then they're realizing that they have bone density. So it's pretty common.
Yeah, that is a window of opportunity.
Yeah.
I feel that it is something that we just do not talk about, but it's not that men do not get this diagnosis. They can have osteoporosis. And again, thinking about those other risk factors we just mentioned, those are risk factors that impact men. And sometimes it's not crossing people's minds, even thinking about a man that might have those and should get appropriate screening as well.
For sure.
And so when you do get your bone density, and Nick already alluded to this, you're going to see something called a T-score, and that is the measurement that is comparing you to that younger, healthy adult.
Right.
I think it's confusing because it's looking at negative numbers, which always, I think, makes our minds go a little wacky. So if you are between 0 and -1, that's considered normal. If you're between -1 and -2.5, then you're in the osteopenia range. And if it's more negative than -2.5, then you're in the osteoporosis range. But I think the other big thing to know is you can be in the osteopenia range and still be really high risk. And so your doctor may also do something called a FRAX score. And even now it's coming up on some of the bone densities automatically on the bottom of that.
I've seen that on a couple of reports that they give you your FRAX score.
And I think of the FRAX like when we were talking last month about cardiovascular risk. And instead of just looking at that one cholesterol number, that ASCVD risk calculator that we kept bringing up, looks at a bunch of different risk factors to give you a score of what's your chance of heart attack or stroke in the next 10 years. The FRAX is the same for bone density and looking at different risk factors and estimating what's your chance of having a fracture. So you can be in the osteopenia range, but still have just as high of risk of a fracture as someone in the osteoporosis range.
Absolutely.
And so don't think if you're in osteopenia range that you're just good to go.
Yeah, because people do. I think they're just hoping they don't get beyond -2.5. But realistically, your risk factor or your likelihood of fracture could be very similar as someone that is osteoporotic.
So if you were talking to someone, Nick, that is osteopenic, let's say, and they're saying, what can I start doing today to help myself? What would you tell
This
them?
is the fun part, right? And this is really the advice is essentially for everybody in that we should be hoping to maintain or improve our strength, right? And the way to do that is we load our bodies, aka resistance training. So that is really the best way if you are worried about it and or if you already have been diagnosed is how can you start to implement resistance training? I think that's the first step into your routine. And it's not just any resistance training. People might think that, I can just go in and do X, Y, and Z machine, or I can do bicep curls and push-ups, whatever, and that's going to, since I'm resistance training, that's going to change things for me. And you look at the data and you start peering into it with a little bit more clarity, is you have to either directly or indirectly load the spine during resistance training. It sounds scary, right?
It does, yeah. Tell us more.
It does. When you're talking about people with, weaker
Yeah.
bones, you're like, let's load the spine.
Yeah, let's load the spine and let's lift heavy. Those are, once you start going down that arena, That's a lot of terms you'll hear is load the spine and lift heavy. And that's obviously good advice, but it's terribly timed, right? It's not very approachable for someone with no or little resistance training experience to do those two things. And it's a terrible advice. That's kind of the reason I love physiology. You kind of live in the gray area. There's a lot of gray area in osteoporosis. But if you look at it from its most simple form, directly loading your spine is putting something on your back or your shoulders, like a barbell back squat or a barbell step up, or you're carrying a heavy loaded pack on your back. You're directly loading your spine. Indirectly is essentially any way else, whether you're holding weight out in front with dumbbells or kettlebells, or a front squat with a barbell, or holding weight down by your side doing a farmer's carry. We're indirectly loading our spine, aka we're getting compressive forces acting vertically because we're weighing more, right? We're holding weight. And it doesn't matter where we're holding that around our bodies, we're still indirectly loading our spine. I think once you look at it a little bit from a different lens, you can realize, oh, it's not so scary. From there, where do I need to go? And that's the fun part for me, is getting someone to the point where they are comfortable doing bigger movements.
Yeah, speaking of, because I think a lot of times I would have patients who were very inactive. We got this diagnosis, and we talked about the importance of weight-bearing exercise. I was really at that point just being like, okay, we'll count anything. Walking counts. Basically anything but swimming. But does that count? Like, how much does just walking help?
That's a great question. So if you're not walking, that's the best place to start. The beauty of walking and the beauty of our bodies is obviously it is weight bearing. We're only seeing maybe 1 to 1.5 times our body weight each time our heel strikes the ground, as far as the forces we're having to diminish physiologically. But it's a great start. If you have no loading, then you have to start at the bottom of the pyramid, because if you try and skip steps, you're going to run into a brick wall. So you have to start really basic. So walking is great, but is that going to reverse things for you? The answer from my perspective is no. But just think of all the other good things as far as health walking does for you. We should all be doing it, right? But that really speaks to the training portion. Is if you look at the basics of walking and the beauty of it, from a resistance training side, if you're really attacking this, you're mastering your body for the first 2 or 3 months, and you might never touch a weight, right? We're not really impacting our bones at this point, but we're setting the stage to do that at some point in time. So you really have to stretch out your timeline of, obviously, I'm motivated, I want to make this change, but if you get too aggressive, then I've seen not great outcomes.
Now, say you have someone that has picked up walking. They've been walking for a year and they're ready to take it to the next step, but literally have never done any sort of resistance training. What is your recommendation in that situation?
They'll probably get a lot of recommendations about weighted vest. I should wear a weighted vest,
Yes.
right?
Please talk about that trend.
I am seeing them walking
Yeah.
around outside all the time.
I love the weighted vest because aerobically and cardiovascularly, it might raise heart rate by 4 or 5 beats per minute, depending on your fitness level. And I think it's just building a little bit more strength and endurance and muscular endurance with a weighted vest. Is it enough to make a difference from a bone loading perspective? 10% of your body weight in a repetitive motion that your body accommodates to very quickly is probably not going to be enough. I look at it from the perspective of, I can get an indirect load on my spine and I can use it for a walk. I can supplement it with exercises like my squatting or my stepping up or my farmer's carry when I have a very neutral vertical spine that I can support it. Because most of the time we're dealing with a deficiency in our upper body strength to really impact our lower body. So if I can load myself centrally and doesn't affect my balance, I can start to incorporate it in other things. I think that's the kind of the beauty of it, that it gets overlooked a lot. But yeah, if you're thinking about using the weighted vest to, hey, I'm really going to get after my osteoporosis with my weighted vest, it might not going to be enough. But I think it's another great way to slowly turn the needle in the right direction.
That's a great point. I like what you also said, because this is me, someone who had no upper body strength because I was years of cardio queen before I started lifting weights.
Yeah.
But it was a great way, if you wear a vest, if I don't have any upper body strength and I'm working on building it, to load my body.
And maybe from a preventive standpoint, if you're doing it in your younger years, maybe it will
Potentially.
have a little bit better effect on your bones in the long run than just walking normally. But definitely, if you're someone that has a severe osteoporosis or compression fracture, do not do that.
Do not. Yeah, it's not worth it. No. Yeah, there's a lot more body weight movements that are geared towards you basically relearning how to use your body again and understand the breathing and how you can use your abdominals and glutes to secure your spine and pelvis in the areas we want them to be in.
So for that person that's maybe been able to start walking, let's say 30 minutes a day, 4 or 5 days a week, and now they're ready for that next step, but don't really want to go out and buy a lot of equipment or that kind of stuff, what do you recommend for them?
That's a great question. I think at this point, if you're doing that consistently, I think you've got a really good foundation of fitness, at least cardiovascularly, to where 2 to maybe 3 times per week, consider getting into some form or fashion of resistance training. For me, I coined what's called Trubee training, and I've created 3 phases that last about 4 to 6 months, depending on the person coming into it. The first phase, I make everybody do regardless. I don't care if they're a professional athlete coming in to work with me, because it exposes a lot of weaknesses. They might touch a weight of the 3 strength days and likely the 16 to 18 strength movements that are in that phase. They might touch a weight 3 times. It's more about understanding their body and their mechanics and how we're going to move forward from those places. Realistically, it's setting up you for success in those second and third phases. And then once you graduate from those, you can get a little bit more aggressive in terms of how much I want to load relative to my top tier capacity.
So give me a hint. What could they, like with holding a plank with straight arms, is that something that would load things? We're trying to do some squats from a chair up and down.
Great question. Yeah. So for me, I'm teaching those movements, right? It's like I'm starting to teach the mechanics of a squat. A lot of times you do start from a chair, right? You maximize what somebody can do and has done a million times in their life, and then teach mechanics from there. So a lot of it is body weight squats or wall sits to understand what that feeling looks like. The biggest one I use, because you can start right away with that indirect load of the spine, you can be pretty aggressive with it early, is a farmer's carry. Yeah,
Can you tell people, I had to look this up a year ago because I kept hearing people talking about farmer's carry, and I'm like, what are they carrying?
Or you can check out Nick's Instagram
I do it all the time.
because he has lots of farmer carry examples.
Yeah. So the easiest way is you're holding weight in one or both hands and you're walking under control. And from the onlooker, they're like, wow, that person's posture is really good. It must not weigh very much. And they're like, but realistically, it's pretty challenging, right? So if a person is really worried about compression fracture or really low T-score, you're probably starting with a weight that's easy on purpose, and you're just kind of slowly building. But someone with a pretty low T-score, I've had people with a -3 to -3.5, but no history of fracture, they might be at 35 to 45 pounds in each hand.
Well, if you're somebody out there that's going, what in the world, farmer's carry? I'll tell you, because that was me a little while ago. So I've been able to do like a 25-pound kettlebell in one hand. That is really heavy.
Real heavy. Yeah. So, realistically, you need it to be heavy. That's the point. My kind of recommendation is once you get a feel for it and you're comfortable with your posture and you're like, all right, I want to try it, make it to where after about 30 seconds of carrying it, you're like, it would feel really good to just put this down now. That would be great. Much beyond that, once we see people walking around the track forever, that's not really a heavy enough load to impact things on the bone side. Might be great for muscular endurance of the upper body and grip strength, but we're not taxing the bone enough.
Yeah, my grip strength also.
Me too. That
falls
wears
apart.
me out. Yeah.
When trying to do that specific exercise, like, my hand has to let go.
Yeah, so start low on that first, because it sounds super easy to just walk around holding
That's the beauty.
a weight, but it is harder than you think to keep yourself upright. And
yeah, it's very accessible. That's the beauty of it, is anybody can really start doing it. It's not nearly as technique driven as like a deadlift would be, or a Romanian deadlift, or a squat. People have been told don't lift more than 10 pounds, but they're carrying 30 pounds of groceries out of their trunk all the time. So let's make things make sense a little bit.
Now, because of the culture that we live in today, we want things to happen quickly.
yes.
And I would love for you to provide some reflection on how long of consistent resistance training does it require to see a change on your DEXA scan?
That's a great question. So realistically, you're going to have to really talk your provider into giving you a DEXA scan in less than a year.
Which I'm going to butt in here and say insurance is not going to cover that.
They're not going to like it.
No, they will not pay for it.
They will not pay
absolutely.
For it. They're not going to.
Will not pay for it. So that would be something where, like, I always wanted to get more data too, but it's like they will not pay for it until you're 2 years and a day past that last one. So this, again, maybe if you can time getting one from the local academic research
a freebie
center
source, maybe.
somewhere.
Yeah, right.
In the midst of that, if you're really wanting to dive into this, that would be And I actually don't know. You might know this. Do you know what the cost would be if someone was just wanting to pay out of pocket to go to an imaging center?
That might depend on location, but it could be $350 to $500 maybe out of pocket, maybe more.
Yeah, and here locally in Lexington, if you're interested, many of the big health systems, you can pay cash to have these tests done. But you would have to contact them to see what the actual cash price would be if you had your healthcare provider put in the order.
Yeah.
But they are able to tell you that number ahead of time before you actually go get it done.
Yeah. But back to that, that's a fantastic question. Physiologically, we're not going to see enough breakdown and turnover for at least 8 months at best, like absolute best 8 months. Most of the time for people, it's usually 15 to 18 months we start really seeing some change. And I think that comes down to we finally get to a spot strength-wise, if you're just looking at it purely from a physical side of things, we're not really strong enough yet to tax our bone to the level it needs to see it be taxed at.
Well, that makes sense.
And a lot of times it takes more than a year of consistently, progressively overloading to start having that level that we need to see on the bone. Which for me is fun. It's, look at how good we get to do and how much all the other benefits we get to see from it. The bone just becomes the cool thing that happens. But realistically, it's like they notice their function being better, their recovery being better, their sleep being better, all the other stuff. And then bone's like just the kind of the surprise 10-year-old on Christmas morning kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
And we worry so much when you do have osteoporosis about you falling and what would potentially happen if you fall, that you could break something. And so just being stronger and knowing how to do these movements is going to help your balance and help prevent you from falling as frequently as well.
For sure. And there was a really good study that came out in 2017, maybe. It's called the Lift More trial. It came out of Australia, and it was an 8-month study. Obviously, they were capitalizing on it takes 8 months to break down and grow new bone. It's from a training perspective, and most people, it's not very approachable. From my perspective, it at least allows me to say we can change things through exercise. So for 8 months, they did, and this is going to scare people, 2 times a week, they did barbell deadlift, barbell back squat, and barbell shoulder press at 80 to 85% of when they're 1 rep max, 5 sets of 5. A lot of volume, a lot of intensity. If I did that, I'd probably be crushed. And I lift weights almost every day.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, they did an impact exercise. Impact is just a fancy way of saying landing, different forms of landing. And they had the person stand up vertically, arms, nobody can see me, but I'm demonstrating this right now. Arms fully extended overhead, palms facing backwards. They gripped a bar. From that bar, they jumped and pulled themselves up. And then from that position, they let go and they landed.
Oh, that's pretty high.
It's a very intensive impact training exercise, unless you're doing a lot of plyometrics and stuff like that. And we're not talking like Olympic jump height. These were 65-year-old ladies that haven't probably jumped in decades. But the data from it was really good. They saw a lot of things happen and change in the bone side of things, and really good things happen overall body strength. So that's the data that we work off a lot when we say we have to have a high enough load to see changes. Because their control group, I think they did shoulder shrugs, a front shoulder raise, a lunge, and something else. And it was all done from home with no supervision at 10 to 15 reps at your self-selected weight. So those people probably weren't really challenging themselves. 30 to 40% of their 1 rep max, not 85% of the 1 rep max.
And what kind of results did those people see? Because I do think that's probably the majority of what
people try to do.
Yeah.
A majority of people trying to do that, and a majority of those people, the average of that group saw bone loss. Some saw bone gain. So it was like I had to go back and look, but the range was like somebody saw improvement of 5% was the highest. On average, it was doing nothing, basically. They may have improved on like muscular strength in some areas, but it wasn't actually taxing the bone. Compared to the other group, I think, I don't quote me on this, but they were somewhere in like maybe 6 to 8% improvement.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Which that's amazing. That could take somebody from osteoporotic.
Right.
I was going to say, most of the
that's-
time we give medicines to just stay stable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
improvement's great.
It's pretty cool.
But that is more intense than I
That's very intense.
was thinking.
It's way more intensive. Like 85% of your 1 rep max is, we're talking like we're challenging ourselves. That's not easy.
Now, you mentioned impact. And that was a very extreme example that
Yes.
they used in that study. So what are you doing for impact when you're working from a training aspect?
Great question. What I call the gateway exercise in impact training is called the heel drop exercise. And you go up on your tippy toes like a calf raise, and then you come down and you land. And there'll be different recommendations. Like some studies will say you should be landing with basically straight legs and straight hips. However, I would never recommend someone land like that because I'm still considering joint, tendon, bone, all the other stuff, right? So it's like a slight flexion at the both knee and the hip to absorb some of that impact. But you can make it to where you like feel your eyeballs moving if you're really landing hard enough. So I start people with, all right, let's slow the velocity down. Let's control how fast we drop. Maybe even we start with shoes and a softer surface just to get the technique down and get the feel of it down. And then we can progress that exercise to the moon, right? We can go no shoes, soft surface, no shoes, harder surface, starting to drop more quickly. Then we can start building volume. Maybe it's 30 a day, maybe it's 40 a day, up to maybe it's 100 a day, right? There's a new study that came out. I think they got their patients up to 120 heel drops a day. And that was enough impact to see improvements in bone.
Right. Because that does seem like that would be pretty easy to incorporate
It's
into your
easy.
day. You can throw 10 in here, 10 in
That's
here.
the beauty of it,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't have to be like, oh, how many sets and what's my rest intervals and this and that. No. Can you accumulate 80 of those in a day? Do your heels hurt? Do your knees hurt? Do your arches hurt? No. Let's continue for another week. Or maybe let's take 3 or 4 days off and you can mix and match it.
That is very approachable.
Yeah,
Yes.
super approachable.
How much variability do you need in the things you're doing? Or is it like if you just get 3 or 4 exercises down that load the spine differently, can you just stick with those forever? Or do you need to constantly be changing it up?
That's a great question. So you're getting at progressive overload. And all that means is you're doing more than you were doing before. Yeah, so most people think I have to continue to add more weight. That's probably the last thing I do. You can change like the velocity of how quickly or slowly you're moving a resistance. So 1 rep that takes 8 seconds compared to 1 rep that takes 2 seconds, you've done 4 times more work. So you can change simple things like that. The variation is another way to progressively overload because you can do different forms of the movement that attack the neuromuscular system totally different to where the drive from the brain talking to the muscle is a whole different program. I look at it from my experience of training people for the last 20 years is you've got about 4 to 5 weeks maybe where psychologically the person can be locked in. So you have to play with that a little bit too. So I found kind of the beauty is if you can find like a really good system for a month, you'll see, especially if there's some novelty in some of those movements, you'll see yourself improve and that's super motivating, right? And then once you get to that 4th or 5th week, you could still progress and improve. Some people love them, but not everybody. Usually it's like I make a really small tweak in these exercises and they'll be just as engaged as they were before that happened. But that's just all of the data that I've used just working with my people. It's 4 to 5 weeks, try and lock in and then just make small changes and try another 4 or 5 weeks.
So just thinking about progressively overloading, that's really what you need to do to keep seeing improvement.
You do. Yep. And at some point, like there is the law of diminishing returns. That's just our physiology in a nutshell. But then it comes down to, can I still load heavy enough regardless of the movement? It doesn't really matter at that point. I could focus on squats for 4 weeks, or I can do deadlifts for 4 weeks, or I can do a variation of both of those 2 things and then flip-flop and go back and forth. But if you're loading heavy enough throughout the week, then realistically, it wouldn't really matter.
You mentioned what some of the studies said to get results. What have you personally seen with any of your clients that you've worked with on their improvement in their scans?
Yeah, I think really capitalizing on what they can do best. Some people can tolerate the impact more than resistance training and vice versa. Some people have injuries or past injuries where movement limitations don't allow them to do those big movements, right? The lift more study is great, but if they can't deadlift and squat, now what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
So you have to meet yourself where you are and capitalize on what you can do. I've worked with one lady who, she was only 53. And I think she had cancer and ended up getting an early bone screen. That's why she found out at 51 she had osteoporosis. But she got in a really bad car accident where she had some lumbar spinal fusion. So squatting and deadlifting were very uncomfortable for her, but she could farmer's carry. So we did a million different versions and varieties of farmer's carry. But over about 13 to 14 months, that was our main form of spinal loading was the farmer's carry. And she went from a negative 2.7 to a negative 1.8. So
Wow,
we're making
that's
changes
extreme.
here. That was the DEXA scan after I think it was a 14 month. She was able to get a follow-up scan. Pretty
So
cool.
what about, let's say, an older person who is really limited in their mobility. And at this point, getting up and getting around the house is all that they can do. Is there anything they can do in a chair or something that is an option for them?
Absolutely. I think that what helps even more just functionality wise is even if you have to use your arms just up and down out of a chair, that's an easy way to start, quote unquote, loading a little bit. Most of the time, if someone's able to even do a small heel drop exercise, even if they're using some assistance with their hands on the back of a chair to come down and land, that's a great one to start with too. But that's a difficult question because there's a lot of variability between what people can and can't do.
So like sitting down and doing a bicep curl or an overhead press, is that loading the spine at all?
Overhead press would be indirect load of their spine for sure. That's one of the big ones of the Lift More study was the overhead press. And you don't have to use barbells for overhead press. I really don't recommend it for anybody because it doesn't feel very good. So realistically, either a dumbbell or kind of a goblet style hold where you're holding out like a dumbbell or a kettlebell in front of your face, pressing upward. It's a much more fluid pressing position. But if you're in a chair and you're bound to a chair, the best way to load the spine would be to do overhead press for sure.
So even like maybe picking up, if you don't have weights at home, picking up an empty jug of milk that you fill with water or something like that and just trying to
Absolutely.
press that up.
Yeah. Why not? And I got people that use stuff all the time that has nothing gym equipment. Just load their carry-on bag and do carries around the house with it. It's just let's use what we have.
That's great. And I would say too, if you're adding the walking, maybe doing that outside so you can boost your vitamin D. I wanted to make sure we touched on some of these other things that are important in addition to the exercise. So vitamin D would be one, and getting your 15 minutes of sunshine would help with that a lot. And we're coming into the spring weather here, so it's an easier time to get that. Otherwise, I would say I generally just recommend taking 1,000 to 2,000 units of vitamin D every day if you haven't had your level checked. In general, we always want that vitamin D level over 30. But there's not a lot of evidence when it comes to bone as far as getting it super high that it's going to make any other difference.
Yeah, trying to shoot for 80 isn't going to automatically give you better bone health. But I'll pause here is when we talk about vitamin D levels. Vitamin D does a lot of things other than just our bones. So we could really get in the weeds talking about levels, but specifically for the bones, we're wanting to make sure that they're over 30.
And then I think everybody knows that calcium is important for bones. And the guidelines have changed on this over the years, the benefits and risks of calcium. But currently, the guidelines, if you're under 50, you want to be getting in about 1,000 milligrams a day of calcium. If you are over 50, 1,200 milligrams a day of calcium is a good way to go. Nick, tell me your favorite sources of calcium in your own life.
That's a great question. I supplement with vitamin D. But calcium-wise, I'm a big animal product person. So I eat a lot of eggs, a lot of meat, and then green vegetables.
Yeah, so those leafy greens, broccoli, kale. I'm a big fan of tofu as well. That's been a new thing that I have tried in the last year. I was really scared to try to cook it, and I thought I would hate it. But anyways, it is delicious and is a great source of calcium. And also one of our favorite things, chia seeds. All those seeds that we keep talking about are great sources of calcium too. Sarah, tell me where you get your calcium.
I eat a lot of Greek yogurt, and so that's probably where I get the majority of my calcium. And then I sprinkle on those chia seeds to help that. You can get some additional that they add up over time. They're not some of the big players, but your nuts, your beans, they also have some calcium in them. And there are some products, and always pay attention to, that are fortified with additional calcium. So if you're looking at your nutrition labels, just take a peek and see how much calcium's in them, because even foods that don't naturally have a lot of calcium, sometimes we're seeing calcium added in there.
There's a lot of different guidelines out there, different groups of people that have made their own recommendations about these things, vitamin D and calcium, bone strength, and they don't always agree on exact numbers. I think everyone agrees that the more calcium you can get in your diet, the better you're utilizing it. So trying to get it through what you're eating, your body's going to use that better than just supplementing with an over-the-counter calcium. So it's worth the time, I think, to just maybe track it for a couple days when you're on your normal eating pattern. Just track it, either if you have an app that already tracks that kind of thing. If not, just get on Google and put in how much calcium is in blah, blah, blah that you just ate, and just keep a list of that for a few days and see where you are.
Another thing you might see out there is about magnesium. Just so you know, there's no official recommendation for magnesium supplementation for bone health. We do know that magnesium can play a part, but there's not a specific amount that you're supposed to be hitting in order to optimize your bone health. And we get a lot of our magnesium in our foods from nuts and seeds. So again, another big point for those that we always talk about here on this show.
Yeah, hemp seeds are a great source. And then another thing that's been controversial as far as bone health is vitamin K. And there's been some studies that have shown maybe a little bit of benefit. And then there's been a lot of other studies that have not been able to replicate that benefit. So right now there is no recommendation to take vitamin K. And I really want to specify here too, definitely don't take vitamin K if you are someone that is on blood thinners or you have issues with blood clotting. Check with your doctor about any supplements you're taking if you're on those medicines.
Yes, because you'll see that many supplements advertised for bone health can have vitamin K added to them. So just keep that in mind if you do have that in your medical history, that you need to be communicating that with your provider.
And then one other one that can have some detrimental effects if you go too far on it is vitamin A. So don't go too far into supplementing that one too much. That can have some downside effects, but you can still eat those wonderful orange fruits and vegetables and get some of that naturally.
And then we want to talk about, because this isn't necessarily brought up a lot in the guidelines, but it makes sense that it makes a difference, and it's protein in general. And the reason being, protein is a huge player in our muscle mass. What did you have to say about protein today? I know you're a lover of promoting protein, so give us your spiel about protein and our bone health and muscle mass.
And I'll say Nick has some muscles because I can see him here today, so we'll listen to him.
Yeah, protein's a big one because most people that I work with, it's not surprising, are underweight, I don't want to say malnourished, but undernourished women. And if you look at the guidelines, just USDA guidelines that were created in 1941 during wartime, by the way, say 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight is what you should be getting per day. That's, from my perspective, that is nowhere near enough. Okay, if you look at some studies since then, if you look at the elderly population, they say 65 and older, and if they're active, they say at least 1.3 grams per kilogram of body weight. And if you look at someone that's more active in resistance training, more competitive, maybe kind of athlete studies, they'll say somewhere anywhere between 1.5 to 2.2 grams per kilogram body weight. So talking closer to basically 1 gram per pound of body weight. What I've recommended in a lot of one bone doc I work with a lot, we've stumbled upon most of the time it's 1 gram per ideal body weight is a good goal to shoot for. Most of the time, this is pretty common for a lady that maybe weighs 110 pounds, they're eating 30 to 40 grams of protein a day. And that's not enough there's not enough material at the work site to build anything from, if that makes sense. Because if you're looking at the actual renaturing of the bone, protein is very highly involved in that, as well as if we're trying to get strong enough to load ourselves to have an effect on the bone. Protein is very important in that as well. So realistically, that's kind of what you mentioned before. Let's get a baseline. Let's say, hey, we're going to track for 3 days or a week. And this is a difficult part. Try your best to track what you actually are eating and not what you hope to be eating and get the baseline. A lot of times my recommendation are, let's focus on one meal. Can we make this one meal X number of protein? Let's not worry about the rest. Kind of baby step your way up. Can I really master that meal? Okay, let's master the next one. But to get over 100 grams of protein in a day, if you're not used to it, that's a challenge.
It is, yeah. Something that you could do to start tracking. Again, you can just write it down on a piece of paper, but MyFitnessPal, the free version of MyFitnessPal, does track your protein. So if you wanted to just do that for a few days and see where you are, I think that's the best way to start. And then you can just start inching up. But even going back to some of the things we were mentioning for calcium, if you look at that, doing Greek yogurt and chia seeds, that would be a good way to get some protein and calcium in the morning. But choosing a Greek yogurt over a plain yogurt would be a way to get more protein in.
I know when working with patients and we're trying to increase protein, breakfast is one I always, if I have to pick the meal, I'll go for that one because that tends to be, for many people, the lowest of protein. So if we can master increasing protein at the beginning of the day, then we're setting up to make the rest of the day much easier. So if you're listening here, you're like, I know I'm one of those people that is on the low end. How in the world do I move up focus on your breakfast first. I also like to think about, if it is someone that will have a snack, is trying to, again, think of a snack that might have protein in it, because most of the time people, when they grab a snack, it is just carbs. So that's another easy tip or trick that I like to use, to be like, okay, let's just switch what our snacking looks like. But it is not easy to go from 30, 40 grams of protein to 100 grams of protein a day. And I actually don't advise doing it all at once. Those people end up very constipated.
You got to increase your water intake.
You got to go up on your water. You got to make sure you're still getting fiber, because you're thinking about protein all day, but then suddenly you quit thinking about your vegetables.
Yeah, for sure.
It is challenging trying to adjust your nutrition. So just like we've talked about on many shows, and just as Nick mentioned here, this is something that takes time. You should do it very much in steps, because you're going to set yourself up for success by doing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And be able to continue to do it, because we all know when we dive in too hard, then we don't usually continue it.
Yeah.
Two other things I just wanted to mention from a lifestyle standpoint that are really important is, number one, if you smoke, please stop. That can have huge detrimental effects on your bone strength. I would say if you are a smoker and you're listening to all these things that we're mentioning today and thinking, what would be the best thing for me to do first? Stop smoking. That would be the best thing you could do. But the other thing that can help is cutting back on alcohol. So if you're getting over 2 drinks per day, then you're going to see some negative effects on the formation of bone. It also is going to increase your risk of falling if you're drinking more than 2 drinks. So double whammy there. But alcohol itself has a negative effect on the bone. So stop smoking, cut back on alcohol, and then do all these other things that we mentioned.
Another thing that I wanted to talk to you about is, for people that say this isn't even on their brain right now. They may be in their 30s or 40s and they're like, osteoporosis. What message would you send out to that group of people, and the importance of thinking about developing these routines at a younger age?
That's a really good question. Yeah, nobody is immune. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but physiological middle age is somewhere around 25 to 30 years old. So if we're not trying to counteract the natural decline, then it happens very slowly. So slow that even your body weight might stay the same, even though you're changing your composition pretty significantly on a year-to-year basis. You're losing muscle mass, but gaining fat mass at an equal rate. So if you're 25, 30, 35 years old, realistically, this is your most opportune time, hormonally, physically, all things considered, to implement things like resistance training and impact training. Not only for me are they fun, but for me, it's like washing a car, right? It's like the car is dirty, you wash it, you get immediate gratification from it. Exercise is the same if we're not focusing on the physical. If I say I felt tired and sluggish, or unfocused or disinterested, I engage my body. 30 minutes later, I feel amazing. I'm on top of the world, right? That is the immediate gratification you get from it. If you track that and you trace that, no matter how old you are, you're going to put the plan in process by the time you're 50. You go back to your college reunion and you're the most fit person there. And they're like, what did you do? And you're like, I just did simple stuff since I was 30 years old. And now I get to reap the benefit of it.
Is there anything, like, just thinking about younger people that are exercising in general, usually their motivation is appearance.
Sure.
And so I do feel like more people are lifting weights and things and understand the importance of that. But I think a lot of people are doing maybe lighter weights, more reps. What I'm taking away from you today is we need to be lifting so heavy that I can only do it a few times. And I don't always do that.
That's a great quote. Yeah. I think if you're challenging yourself for 6 to 8 reps, where you don't have to go to failure, but if you pick something heavy enough for an exercise where you do 6 and you're like, I can maybe do 2 more, that's working pretty hard, right? That's taxing yourself. Not that there's anything wrong with 12, 15, 18 repetitions. You're building muscular endurance, but you're not really changing appearance much either at that point. We're not really building much muscle mass at that rate. But I think if you are there, maybe throw in a week where you do tax yourself a little bit more, because physiologically, and we can't really lift heavy all the time. That's not great for our connective tissue and all the soft tissue of our bodies. So it's overall, you challenge yourself at the most opportune time. And the times you don't feel great, don't push it, right? I put a post up yesterday, it just came to me. It was, when you feel great, add weight.
Oh, I like
Yeah.
that.
right?
Mhm.
Because
I
every
like that.
every day the stars don't align. It might be once a week. So the day that you feel awesome, you're like, man, that's the most, your body is most primed to do it. If you're exercising and things don't feel amazing, don't push that, because that's consistency is the key and longevity is the key. If you push it too many times and you feel terrible, you're gonna fall off at some point.
And then also for some of our younger listeners, can you reflect on some of those that may be doing a lot of endurance training and not spending a lot of time doing any resistance training in their 20s or 30s and how that can impact their bone health?
Great, yeah. I think this kind of goes under the radar a lot, at least from my experience. But I've had quite a few people that are in their late 20s or early 30s with a pretty extensive background in distance running, swimming, or cycling. And when it ends up happening over time, there's many things that this is just maybe 10% of all the things that go along in the decline of bone mineral density. But essentially, if you're training a lot of cardio and that's your main source, is number one, you start to crave carbohydrate, right? Because just to feed the fire and feed the intensity, carbohydrate is your main fuel metabolically to maintain that exercise. So what ends up happening is you undereat protein. So that's step one. Step two is you're over-exercised and underfed a lot of times. And then over time, physiologically, when you are trying to go a greater distance, what ends up happening is your body starts looking for ways to be efficient. And the easiest way to be efficient if I have to carry my body weight over a long period of time is to weigh less. Well, we don't just lose fat mass, we also lose muscle mass, and we also deload bone mass in all the effort to be more efficient and use less energy if I'm exercising for longer periods of time. So that's part of the process. There's other things that go along with that, but at least from the physical side and from my perspective, those are the things that do end up happening to people who have a really big, robust, only training cardiovascularly for a long time.
We're not going to go into detail on medications, but know that there are a lot of medications out there that can help. And there have been new medicines in the last few years that have come out with even more beneficial effect on improving bone strength. So if you are in that category, make sure you talk to your doctor about your options for medications to help with osteoporosis, because we really do want to prevent those fractures and keep you healthy and moving as you age.
And if you are interested in a show dedicated to that aspect of this, please just let us know. We can arrange more information on that. But today we wanted to really spend most of our time just talking about exercise's impact.
So, Nick, this has been great. You've given us a lot of good information. You're making me feel like I need to stand up and do some heel drops as soon as we wrap this up. But just to summarize what we've talked about, remember, if you have any of those reasons that you might be thinking you have had some early bone loss, make sure you talk to your doctor about it and see if you can go ahead and get a bone density screening. Otherwise, the insurance coverage is usually looking at postmenopausal women starting at 65. So make sure you're getting screened, and then stop smoking if you are. Cut back on alcohol if you're drinking too much. Diet-wise, we want to make sure you're prioritizing protein, getting plenty of calcium in your diet. I would recommend just taking some vitamin D, 1,000 to 2,000 units a day.
Or talking with your doctor about having your level checked if you haven't had that done recently.
And if you are doing some pretty extensive vitamin D supplementation, go ahead and check that too, because we don't want you to be overdoing it, because that can cause some problems as well. And then thinking about our weight-bearing exercise, I've learned a lot today.
Giving me some motivation.
Look up what that farmer's carry is if you didn't know what it was. But it seems like we need to be doing some pretty heavy things, or at least mixing that into what you're doing for your exercise, and keep working to change things and improve that progressive overload. And that could look like increasing your weight over time. That could be changing the timing of how you're doing your exercises, or even just doing it in a different form.
Yeah, or reps or sets, adding more overall work.
So I feel like this has been really helpful. And if you're doing all of this, or you're not sure, what you should be doing, one place you could look is...
Yeah, my website's an easy place to go to.
Tell us more.
Why don't you tell us how people can work with you?
Sure. You can go to trubeehealth.com, TRUBEE health.com, or you could reach out, ironically, on Instagram at dr.nicktrubee, NickTrubee. Got a lot of different ways in which you can work with me in different forms or fashions, or even just join an office hour for free.
And if you are interested, at least follow his Instagram page because he puts lots of good info on there as well. But we're just so glad that you could come with us today and do this show because I do feel like many people don't really understand this topic as well. And so I think you have taught Kitty and I a lot today as well.
Yeah.
So we've really enjoyed this.
And just hearing about all of your success stories, I think, with your patients lets us know you really can make a difference with this. Don't feel defeated if you get this diagnosis of osteoporosis. You can make a difference in your bone strength and decrease your risk of falling and decrease your risk of fractures. So
I need to run and lift something heavy now. I think that's all we have for today.
Yes.
thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow us. If you want to know more about treatments of osteoporosis, or if you are thinking of other topics that you want us to do an episode on, please click that link that says send us a text and we'd be happy to incorporate it.
Have a great week.